Hi, I'm Pharaoh, and today I want to take a look at where No Man's Sky might be going in 2026, and maybe more broadly a few things about Hello Games. But I recently made a video about what happened with No Man's Sky in 2025, and that was partly because I've had this feeling that they're building towards something, and I want to use 2025 as my main kind of information for giving me an idea of where they might be heading. And of course, later on this year is their anniversary. So the 10th anniversary of No Man's Sky. Again, I would suggest that they would want to do something important, big, or at least momentous for that occasion. So let's look forward to 2026 with Hello Games and No Man's Sky. Perhaps unusually, I'm going to talk about the future of No Man's Sky while actually looking around the game itself, because I think that will give us some way of focusing on what's happening. So one of the things that they actually brought to us in 2025 were better settlements. And I think that gives us kind of a hint about something. It tells us that they see No Man's Sky as unfinished business, I believe, because settlements couldn't be upgraded fully until they'd kind of resolved the switch situation. You couldn't actually access settlements on the Switch because there were too many textures, there's too many build parts. If you actually look at a settlement, this is a build part. If we were in our own build area, we could build that particular part, we could build that part, etc., etc., and we could build this entire building with the parts that we have available to us. And procedurally, that's what's happening in a settlement. It's throwing together all of these different build parts. And the Switch is not capable of really, really large bases. And therefore, it's not really capable of rendering a full settlement, especially as we have NPCs running around. Here's one. We have our Corvettes. Another thing that Switch is not really kind of particularly good at is rendering a whole Corvette. So we've got like potentially 100 odd parts being rendered there, and we've got probably 1,000, maybe a couple of thousand of parts being rendered with this settlement. All things that could stretch the Switch. Now the Switch 2 came along. It's much, much more powerful, and it can render these things. I don't know how well. I haven't got a Switch 2. I haven't got a Switch 1. But I know that my Steam Deck is capable of rendering these things reasonably well. So I'm sure Switch can do it too. Why am I emphasizing this? Well, if they weren't updating settlements until the Switch system was resolved, then I feel like that tells us that they wanted to. As soon as the Switch 2 came out, they introduced new settlements. I imagine that they were holding that back for a while, and they really wanted to introduce better things for settlements, but they couldn't. But it also gives me an idea. I've always felt like settlements are a potential hub for other elements of the game. For instance, exploration of a single planet as opposed to multiple planets. Or now we have up to 4 settlements, then maybe 4 different planets. They're situated on planets, and theoretically the missions could send us off to look for different things at different planets. At the moment we have these kind of almost fake missions that I don't know if we'll have one available now, but we don't at the moment, that sometimes the citizens want to go off on a mission. But we could potentially get missions from our settlements. For instance, in the bar, we could get like an NPC interaction. Maybe we could get an NPC interaction with the missing barkeeper. I've always felt like the fact that there was no barkeeper maybe suggested that they had plans for an NPC barkeeper, so that would be quite nice. And so if they're going to develop a settlement into something that's more of a story-driven, mission-driven thing. That could be something that could happen this year as they integrate these things together a bit more. So one of the things we have in our Corvettes are mission terminals, and Sean made a big thing of this, talking about how we could get together on our Corvettes and run missions together in teams, a little bit like we do in the Anomaly. I think many people, because there's a Quicksilver one here, just assumed that these were the same missions as in the Anomaly, but they're not. They're slightly different. They're kind of between space station missions and Anomaly Nexus missions. I think this gives us another clue, is that they're kind of thinking of multiplayer. Now, we all know that multiplayer is not it's not like a full emphasis in No Man's Sky. It isn't like a major priority. But I do feel like there's a lot that's left on the table that hasn't ever been done with multiplayer. And again, Switch 1 would have precluded, if they'd really gone to town with multiplayer, Switch 1 wouldn't have been able to be part of that, so they would have felt left behind. And I feel like they've seen the Switch 2 as, I mean, I wouldn't say excuse, I would say an opportunity to take things further now. And they're kind of assuming that anybody that's really serious about the Switch platform will probably upgrade at some point to the Switch 2. I mean, I know that's not necessarily true, but I think that's the way they're seeing it. The fact that we haven't seen many of these things incorporated into Switch 1 suggests that they're kind of leaving that platform behind and really focusing on what the Switch 2 can offer. If you don't know, for instance, each of these missions, they're specific to the race. So I'm in a Corvax system. These will be the same in any Corvax system I went to in the next few minutes. I think they change every 10 minutes like Nexus missions, but for the next few minutes, if I went to a Corvax system, I would see these missions. But if I went to a Gex system, I'd see different missions. And if I went to a Vy'keen system, I'd see different missions. So this kind of, to me, kind of hints at a tiered system. Planetary missions potentially at a settlement, system-wide missions at a space station, race-based missions at our Corvette, and galaxy-wide missions at the Nexus, because at the Nexus it will take us to nearby regional stuff, but it will also take us to neighbouring regions if it can't find what it's looking for in the local area, and it will transport us somewhere in the weekend missions to a galaxy-wide pinpointed space everybody goes to, and then everybody goes back to their normal systems. And that kind of would make sense if you're going to tier things up, and it would make sense especially if you were going to put more focus on these multiplayer missions. At the moment, they're kind of almost placeholder simple missions, but they really could be much more involved. The multiplayer elements of the game have been kind of downplayed. I made a video about this, about what they could potentially do with multiplayer missions, but there's definitely more they could do. And I would imagine it's one of the things they've always wanted to do, that they never felt like multiplayer was quite where they wanted it to be. And you see hints of that when they're talking about Light No Fire and how Corvettes are like based on their ships. The ocean-going ships from Light No Fire would be multi-crewed multiplayer experiences, and that they brought Corvettes into the game to mirror that in No Man's Sky. So it feels like something that at the moment isn't fully there, but could be there and might be something they're aiming towards. Now, I see Light No Fire as a multiplayer game at its core. I'm hoping that anyway. Whereas No Man's Sky has always been a single player game with multiplayer elements, and it didn't start off multiplayer. So I feel like multiplayer could be one of the things that we see as an integration, like a kind of smoothing off the rough edges of No Man's Sky, leaving it in a state where they can just continue to bring updates. I'm sure they won't stop bringing updates, but they can kind of not have to work on major updates anymore. They can bring in small nice to haves once they've kind of polished off all of these edges and integrated the game a bit better for multiplayer, all the different things like settlements, corvettes, feeling a more integrated part of the whole. Now, another thing I feel like Corvettes hinted at, obviously we got Corvettes last year, it kind of hinted at a change in the nature of the game. It, as I said in my 2025 video, it didn't feel like a massive change when they brought it out, but the more we interacted with these Corvettes, the more it felt like the game had utterly changed. But it hasn't kind of acknowledged that change. It's just given us Corvettes, and lots of different elements of the game can be approached very differently, and the quality of life improvements are huge. You can get them very early on in a save, but that's not really fully integrated into the game yet. So in the storyline, for instance, bases are very much integrated into the game. Settlements aren't, corvettes aren't. The Nexus kind of is. I wonder if, as part of this unifying and kind of smoothing out No Man's Sky, they might bring corvettes actually into the progression system a little bit more smoothly. For instance, I've always felt that settlements are introduced a little bit too early, because you're just kind of getting your feet, and then after about 10-15 hours you're suddenly also dealing with settlements. It can be a little bit overwhelming, and also almost like, is this the actual core of the game? You can kind of be distracted by them and think they're more important than they are. Now, they may make them more important, and that's kind of my point. Having a progression system through the storyline that actually integrates these things better would be my ideal kind of approach to changing the game. Something that they kind of did for what was it? Was it 4? No Man's Sky 4? Around the time when they introduced the Switch, they kind of re-looked at the progression of the game and kind of introduced better versions of missions at the space station. So I'm thinking, if they were going to look at it again for kind of the momentous 10th year anniversary, they might look at missions, they might look at progression, and they might look at all of these elements and try and tie them together. So I popped up to the local space station to cover a couple of other elements along there. For a start, as I said, the last time they did this, they kind of tidied up this guy's missions. So early on in the game, some of the things you get are much more things like exosuit upgrade charts and multi-tool expansion slots. I'm relatively early in this particular save, to be honest. I've just got one settlement. I've got only about 10 million. I've got quite a lot of nanites because they focus on nanites. I'm not so much focused on money anymore. Corvettes have kind of changed my perspective a bit. Do we really need money as much? I'm not sure. But they've kind of balanced these out in that last time they looked at balance and progression. But since then, they've had things like the guilds. And I felt like everything they introduced kind of threw the balance off. So, for instance, guilds. Some of these things are really a little bit too good to just be given away. We can grind our guild reputation really quite quickly by donating things at every station we come to in this region. We can get to the point where we can redeem these things either for free or very cheap. And some of these things are really quite game-changing things, like multi-tool expansion slots are probably one of the most expensive things in the game, but here we can collect them for free if we have the right tools. If we do completely grind our reputation for the races, we can buy modules and then we can sell them. See, this is a 33% discount, and so I don't think it will quite work here. But let's try. So we've got 267 nanites, and now if we go to sell that, yeah, we can now sell that for 300 nanites. So I've just made a profit on that deal, and I haven't even got that high a reputation with the Corvettes yet. I think you can get up to 50% discount when you're buying, but it doesn't discount the selling. So it's kind of messed up. And I'm sure, well, I know that Hello Games know, because the first time I noticed this, I told them. It's like, this is a bit of a mess. This could be an exploit. And they haven't done anything about it, really. But sometimes I think the reason they haven't done the things that we might expect them to fix is because they have a further development along the line further on in the future that will be fixing that problem. And they've always seen that as like, that's okay, when we get to that, everything will be much better. And again, I'm wondering if they've always had a feeling of what the game is going to look like at the 10th anniversary, and they've been building towards that. And their priority has been to keep putting things into the game quite quickly recently, and then tidy them all up for this kind of putting a bow on it 10th anniversary update, which I'm hoping, again, will be multiplayer focused, but hopefully will tidy up some of these things. Now, my thinking was, since guilds, they introduced bartering systems. We have two bartering systems. We have the bones, where we can swap bones. So if we wanted, say, to make a skeleton with the horned predator skull, and I had other bones, then I could, I don't think I've got any bones, but I could select them from my various inventories, and then I could make an offer, and they would either accept or not accept that in order for me to get this. So I can kind of manipulate it. I can put things in here. I think you still can move things from one slot to the other to maybe re-offer the same thing, like insisting, and no, this is really worth it. Or you can put higher value items in your offer until it becomes more likely. And sometimes you get like a low percentage chance of getting it for just a few scraps. Now, I quite like the bartering system. I feel like for bones, it's a little bit take it or leave it. I'm not that bothered by bones, really. I feel like the other place where they brought in the bartering system was the Corvette station. Here, we can purchase modules, but we can also trade for advanced modules. And so if we haven't found out in the wild a particular part we really want for our build, then we can select it and then offer it other things that we've got. Here we can actually see moderate. If I click make an offer, I might get it. I probably won't, but I might. Now it's good, possibly better than 50-50 chance of getting this item for all of those items. Now I feel like this system's a little bit mean, but I think it's better mean than too generous. So, I mean, they could tweak it a little bit. I don't know if they really need to. These, you can get these just by going around planets. So you're trading things that you've picked up for free for things that are relatively expensive. So I've put a rock hopper wing module into my inventory, and I can sell it for 350,000. Now, that's not a huge amount, but it's not to be sniffed at. If I have something major like a cockpit, then it sells for 1,600,000, which is quite a lot for something we pick up free on a planet. Maybe some of these parts are a little bit too expensive and some of these parts are a little bit too cheap. It maybe needs a bit of balancing, but that's the reason I believe that when we're bartering for things that we really want, like reactors, cockpits, etc., that we're having difficulty kind of actually getting it to accept a deal. So I can't help thinking that guilds would be much, much better if we had a form of bartering where we actually selected, when we're going to donate, various things from our inventory, and maybe it would filter out things that we couldn't give, a bit like the bones would. The bone section will only allow us to swap bones for bones, so this could maybe just have a subset of things that we can give to each of the guilds, and we can kind of have a larger amount of them to try and barter for some of these things, like multi-tool expansion slots. It suddenly becomes something that we need to kind of save up for, but not in monetary terms. And I would imagine they'd probably have similar things, because they've thought about what they want for each of the guilds. So maybe getting a nice big bundle of salvage glass and offering, say, 5 or 6 salvage glass for one would be maybe worth it. Or maybe one crystallized heart, or maybe one walker brain. These are a little bit trickier to get, or take longer at least. Quad service. These are all things that you would pretty much, because it's mercenary, these are all things that you have to kill things for. But also they're all things that could take time, and with a better balance of 5 of these for 1 of those, or 10 of these for 2 of those, it could be a much more interesting interaction with the guilds. Obviously we would also still have the element of having to have a certain amount of reputation to get those things, so we might not actually immediately get access to multi-tool expansion slots, or it could be that it's factored into the swap process. So if we're at the maximum, then we don't have to give as many in to get these multi-tool expansion slots. Either way, I feel like it will be much better. And it could also potentially be a reworking of these guys. We could maybe haggle for things. It might be interesting. I'm not sure if that's a great idea for these guys, but maybe things like the exo craft, because that's later in the game. Maybe we would pick up certain things other ways and then swap them. But I feel like perhaps one of the reasons why they haven't fixed some of these subsystems is because things are going to change anyway, at least with a bartering system or a more integrated form of missions. All of these things might be better integrated, and it will supersede what we've got at the moment. I also feel like there's a little bit of an issue with how expensive Corvettes are. If we go to make an offer on a Lifeform ship, for instance, we can exchange it for nothing pretty much all the time. Because look, its trade-in price is 41,580,000. Now this is an S-class, I grant it. Probably just under half of its slots, which is what the price is usually based on. It's usually based on slots. But they are really quite expensive ships, and you can just build a Corvette and then trade it in for a ship, and then scrap that ship for quite a lot of money, and then just build another very basic Corvette, etc., and go round in that circle, and it's another exploit. And I wonder if, again, one of the reasons why they haven't really kind of sorted that out yet is because they're going to change the way things work. And I'm not suggesting that ships will become a bartering system, but I just feel like an economy balance may be due, and that could be another thing that has to be factored in for like a more polished update. So I think you can see a pattern here of what I'm trying to say, is that I feel like No Man's Sky is long overdue a good look at its progression, the economy, multiplayer, and just generally all of those kind of story and different parts of the game, and the way that they don't quite mesh together in a way that you would expect. Instead, you kind of get to about 10 to 15 hours and everything's thrown at you all at once. The only thing that's really paced away from you are staffs, Atlantid multi-tools, and purple systems. The rest of it is really thrown at you very, very quickly, all at once. In the first 10 to 15 hours, you kind of get a bit overwhelmed. I mean, I see this all the time on Reddit. I just got to 10 hours and I don't know what to do in this game. It's just too much. And kind of people's learning curve is challenged around about 10 to 15 hours of play. So I feel like those things need tidying. I feel like Hello Games must know. If I know, just by reading comments on Reddit and also just noticing, then I'm sure they know. If I think that the guild system doesn't quite work, I'm sure they know. If I think that there are like obvious exploits that you can go and get loads of Corvette parts for free, build a very basic Corvette, swap it for a ship and scrap it, I'm sure they must know. Even the costs of things like when you pick up an interceptor, again, that doesn't feel quite integrated into the game. You could almost say crashed interceptors could be purple system only, or don't become obvious or visible until later on, a bit like the autophage. Because at the moment that's a really strange early exploit. If you are prepared to go and get a few interceptors early on, your money woes are over. Even quite a few of your nanite problems could be over. It's just not been balanced and integrated quite well into the game. So the other thing that's looking a little bit dated now are freighters, and a lot of people have been thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have freighters that can be built a bit like Corvettes? Then there have been people looking at the game files and saying, hang on a minute, for quite a while now we've had potentially the ability to have multiple freighters. Now, I'm not sure if that's actually what's going on with freighters. I don't think we will necessarily get multiple ones. We might get better customization, I don't know, but I don't think we're going to be able to get multiple freighters, just because for me, it doesn't feel right in the game. I think there could be one of two things going on there. It could be a multiplayer element. So, for instance, within a fire team, which is currently 4, maybe that will expand if they're going to look at multiplayer again. But within the multiplayer environment, you might have people that are playing with you. If they tidied up multiplayer, the one thing that really needs sorting out is playing through the story as a group. It doesn't really work. You end up having to just do everything twice or 3 times or 4 times. I mean, there's some really nice videos out there of people actually trying to play No Man's Sky as a group, but they never really managed to do it fully. For instance, things like when you get your first freighter battle, it can be invisible to other people because you've all jumped into a new system, but only one of you is triggering a freighter battle and the others are just not seeing it. And there are lots of other things like that, or just confusing things where you think, well, we've just done this together, why have I got to go and do it again? Or not even realizing you've got to do it again. So you might be focusing on one person's progression for quite a while and then realize the other person's got to catch up. Now, again, I feel like this is something that Hello Games must be aware of and must kind of niggle them that it doesn't quite work. So my kind of thinking is they would want to tidy that up at some point. And maybe this is the juncture at which they do that. Tidy up multiplayer and bring in a better integrated storyline that not just better integrated for all the different parts, but works better in a team if you play together. And again, one of the problems with multiplayer has always been, well, you can't consistently get 4 people together all of the time. Maybe someone's busy one day, maybe you have to do a bit on your own, but that could be better integrated, and it doesn't have to be the same story. Even it could be a multiplayer story that kind of gets better integrated into all of the different elements. So again, this is one of the reasons that made me think a better balancing system, because one of the things they could do is better multiplayer, multiplayer story, multiplayer progression could be better integrated. Now, another thing they really recently threw into the game and haven't quite got working fully is archiving starships. So they brought this in, and it was basically on the bridge of our freighter. We could put starships in there. It's a little bit broken in that if you picked up a broken starship, you could chuck it in and it would fix everything. So, and I think that still happens. Also, it doesn't work with Corvettes. It says cannot place Corvettes into storage. This thing about having multiple freighters could be a different thing. It could be, if it's not multiplayer, a way of storing Corvettes and a way of parking Corvettes more conveniently. Because at the moment, when we arrive at our freighter, we have to park on these strange pads that don't quite integrate very well. What if we had starship storage physicalized? So we actually had a type of frigate that stored starships. Now, this is something I suggested to them ages ago, before we even had storage. And I was a little bit disappointed that they actually went down this route of having them on the bridge. But what if for Corvettes we actually got frigates that could do this? Because, for instance, at the moment, if we go into our management, this is going to be a small free. I haven't even developed this save, but we can have up to 50 of these. And if we had a frigate that could store, say, 4 Corvettes on it, then that would be our own balancing act. We could decide how many ships we wanted, and we could store 4 on there, and then we'd have less frigates. So if we didn't really care that much about sending our frigate missions out, or if we wanted a specialised group of frigates that we sent out, then we'd have a few extra that we could then for ourselves decide what our priorities are, and we could have different frigates. So maybe having extra freighters in our list is actually just different storage options. So instead of having multiple freighters, we actually have multiple freighter-like frigates that can store Corvettes. That would be just a nice thing to have, and I don't know if that's what's going on. It's just wild speculation, really, but it would be really nice. The fact that we can teleport on board a frigate does make them really convenient. So if our landing pads, instead of our landing pads, if we look at them from here, kind of being out there somewhere, if we had specific frigate landing pads that allowed us to then teleport to the different frigates from those frigates, and then also store Corvettes, that could be really nice. That could be a really nice quality of life, but also a better integration of the game, a more physicalized element of the game. I feel like frigates feel a bit dead at the moment. The fact that we can turn up on a frigate and we can walk around a totally abandoned place where nothing is going on, and the only reason we ever come here is to repair things. It's just a little bit of a missed opportunity, I feel. We have all these cool rooms. Why don't we have NPCs here working on things? Why don't we have the ability to maybe upgrade them more directly instead of through modules in our freighter? Just make these things feel a little bit more alive, maybe. Essentially, give us a reason to come here. We very rarely have to come here. We only really have to come here when we've broken them. And then later on in our playthrough, we hardly ever have to do that. So we never come here. And these are lovely, properly rendered, built-out environments that we just don't go to. At the moment, our only real interaction is speak to the captain But the captain's actually on the freighter, really, because we actually see them walking around the freighter. And this is all we can really do. We can collect units. This is a trade one, so that makes sense. Or we can collect some resources if it's a mining one. We can scan if it's an exploration one. But really, it's very, very limited. And it feels like these were introduced a long while ago now, and they've kind of been left to kind of gather dust. They're not really doing anything for us. Certainly nothing along the lines of our Corvettes. And the last thing that people often speculate is being able to take over space stations. Now again, I just don't think that will ever really happen. I just feel like it's too much of a part of a system, and it would kind of assume ownership of a system. And for a while, when it looked like it might be happening, when we got some parts that maybe suggested that we would be able to build in these things, but actually they turned out to be freighter parts, it felt like maybe there would be certain ways to build things in them. Obviously they're new space stations, so we have new space for things. So they could easily put booths in here for expanding the system. But all they've actually done is made use of the space under the stairs. Now obviously there's another stairs here they could use, and there's another space here they could use. But these have a massive expansion possibility, and instead of kind of utilizing that space up there, they've tucked things in here. I wonder if that's partly for rendering, so that you don't have to specifically render all of this stuff when you're landing. So it might be strategic. As you can see, my thoughts are very much along the lines of the 10th anniversary would be a great opportunity to tie things together, to polish off the rough edges, better integrate things, and to better integrate multiplayer, get that working a bit more smoothly, and in general just present a finished version of the game. Take the opportunity of the 10th anniversary to say, this is our vision, this is what we want No Man's Sky to be, and then, I'm not saying finish with it, but leave that broad structure in place, and then whatever else they add to it, try and keep it within that broad structure. I mean, I wouldn't be upset if after the 10th anniversary they slowed down, only gave us, say, one update a year. As long as they were still giving us expeditions, then I would be perfectly happy with that. So, I've been Pharaoh, travel well, and goodbye for now.